For some buyers, they can only have the best. The best suit, the best house, the best experiences, and the best car. So if you've arrived at a position in your life and you've been driven in Mazdas before and you'd like to stay and continue to enjoy that experience, then there is only one Mazda for you. This is the new Mazda CX-9 Ignite Edition, the new flagship for Mazda in Malaysia. Available with one turbocharged engine and two-wheel drive, this is the ultimate Mazda experience. My name is AIMAN ABDULLAH, this is MalaysianMotoring, this is our review of the Mazda CX-9 Ignite Edition. At 327,000 ringgit, this is the most expensive Mazda that you can currently buy. And being the Ignite Edition, some small differences in terms of exterior trim. So for starters, the enormous Mazda grille is now done in gloss black, which against this soul red metallic looks absolutely fantastic. On top of that, the 20-inch alloy wheels and the wing mirror caps are also done up in gloss black to make this car look a little bit more distinctive out on the road. The CX-9 has actually been around for a while, but you wouldn't be able to tell from its design. The very elegant front end, the beautiful Mazda proportions stretched to fit over this large three-row SUV body style certainly looks very good. And for those who are wondering, you can tell the difference between the CX-9 and the smaller CX-8 in terms of its exterior design, simply because it just looks a little bit more special. It's from this angle where you notice the sheer mass of the CX-9. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a large three-row SUV, and so that body stretches all the way to the rear, but it does so very elegantly. Now these are Bridgestone Ecopia tyres in 255/50 R20 size. They are massive wheels and massive tyres, again to help control some of the power up front. And you can see the black finish on the alloy wheels and the black finish on the wing mirror caps. However, they have resisted doing everything in black, so there's still chrome down on the door and chrome around the windows, which certainly looks quite nice. One of the things that you may notice about this particular SUV is there are no roof rails, and this is because there is a sunroof in the front, so obviously you don't want to cover that. And admittedly, this car looks a lot more elegant as a result. I think it's a pretty good looking car. At the rear of the CX-9, you can tell that it's a CX-9 because of this piece of chrome garnish here and a little bit more chrome down there, the very prominent CX-9 badging here. You also have LED taillights, unfortunately with bulb type indicators, but that's hardly a bad thing. And of course, behind this tailgate hides a little bit more space. Now, as the tailgate rises, I'll talk to you about the powertrain. Now, you would have seen an AW badge on the CX-9 before, but for this year, it's only available as a two-wheel drive, therefore it's front wheel driven. Now, talking about the space back here, with the third row up, the space is kind of limited, especially given this car's sloping roofline, which means back here at the highest point, you don't really have that much space. However, you can fold these rear seats very easily with just one pull here to fold them down, and in doing so, you reveal a lot more space. Now, this car comes as standard with the coil mats that you see here, but this particular car comes with these protector mats over the third row. This is to protect the upholstery as you load things in and out. Underneath this mat, of course, there is a little bit more stuff, like the Space Saver spare wheel. However, this car does not come with a parcel shelf, so please keep that in mind if you intend to load up this car as a two-row SUV and you want to hide your stuff back here. Now, with the third row down, like I mentioned, there is an absolute abundance of space. However, the load height of this car is kind of high, and that's because, of course, this car was available as an all-wheel drive model, which means it had to make room for the rear differential and drive shaft and so on, which means all of this had to sit a little bit higher, but at least you do have a Space Saver spare wheel down here, so you don't need to wait for roadside assistance should you have a flat. And in the third row, there are some amenities like cup holders and a couple of USB-A ports, which is quite nice. However, most CX-9 buyers, believe it or not, only use this car as a two-row SUV, so the first and second row are perhaps a little bit more important, so let's talk about that in there. Now inside the Ignite Edition Mazda, the first thing I'd like to point out is it comes with a sunglasses holder, which is always very appreciated. And now we can take a proper look at this interior. The first thing you'll notice is this new red leather upholstery, which does look very nice and feels very premium. But the trouble is, as part of the Ignite Edition update, we have lost some of the bright work in here. So a lot of the interior panels that used to be done up in silver are now done in black, which, despite the sunroof and the rather large windows, it does make this interior feel a little bit dark. And I think I would have appreciated the silver bright work that this car used to come with. That said, however, the interior design overall is very reminiscent of what we've seen before from the Mazda 6. You have physical controls for the HVAC system down here, and you have the Mazda MZD Connect system up there, which all looks rather good until the system actually boots up, and then you realize that the screen itself is kind of low res. It may be 9 inches, but the pixel density is kind of weak. And that also translates to the 360-degree camera, which is also not the sharpest tool in the shed. It's a bit of a shame given the fact that this car is well over 300,000 ringgit and it still has rather questionable camera quality. However, interior quality is certainly something that you wouldn't question in this car. All of the buttons and all the switchgear, as with many other Mazdas, are absolutely fantastic. Everything feels nice and chunky and nice and robust, like it's built to last a long time. And in terms of the seating position, although I do have a physical instrument gauge in here, an analog instrument gauge rather, it is at least supplemented by a full color heads-up display which displays all of the information that you need it to, which means you'll be spending very little time looking at this. And in typical Mazda fashion, there is only one small instrument display, digital instrument display here, which only shows you like 6 different things, your trip and your ADAS system and stuff like that, because Mazda does not want to overcomplicate things for drivers, which kind of hit and miss. Some people will want a digital instrument cluster, but personally this is good enough. I have all the information that I need here and all the information that I need there, which means I don't need a digital display here, and the analog dials look very nice. In terms of ergonomics, everything in this car falls very easily to hand. I don't have to stretch for anything despite my relatively diminutive size, and that is a good thing for smaller drivers because it means that you shouldn't have too many issues driving this around. And of course, although the 9-inch infotainment system is a touchscreen, you still have the MZD Connect controls down here, which means you never have to stretch for that screen. That said, the touch system disables itself when the car is not in park with the handbrake up for safety reasons, so you'll be using this more anyway. Now, in terms of the front seats, of course, they are both power adjustable with memory functionality for the driver's seat, which also controls the electronic mirror adjustments. You also do not get drive modes in this car, well, at least not how we know it. You have normal, which is normal, and you have sport, and that's it. The idea being you don't want to bombard drivers with too many options. I don't know why Mazda thinks like this, but okay. And the steering wheel is a thin rim steering wheel, but it's very nice to hold, and of course it is leather wrapped and it does look very nice. Other interior accoutrements include a couple of USB ports over here, as well as a couple of cup holders, big door bin holders, and a Bose audio system, which not only looks good, but it sounds fantastic. But because this is a large SUV, let's talk about the back. Now, in the back of the CX-9, there is plenty of space. With this seat set up in my driving position, I have plenty of knee room and plenty of headroom. I also have a couple of cup holders here and a couple of USB-A ports here in the center armrest, although I would have preferred this in the center tunnel because then it would be accessible even if you have 3 people sitting abreast back here. Now, being sat back here, I have my own climate controls with adjustment for fan speed as well as temperature and even vent direction. I also have these blinds which are working very well right now as not to blow out the view that you're getting, and overall it is a nice place to be. I quite like the fact that I have a good amount of under thigh support, and of course I can actually adjust the recline angle of this seat up to this far back, which means I could just lean back and take in a nice long drive should I want to. Of course, being a family SUV, this car has 2 ISOFIX mounts on either side here, and of course these seats can be pulled. Oh, not that far. this far forward, where I still have a good amount of knee room and I can tuck the bottoms, or rather the tips of my feet, in underneath the seat in front of me, which means if I need to make room for third row passengers, it shouldn't be an issue. Now, in terms of putting kids back here, like I said, with the ISOFIX mounts, it should be fine, and the sun blinds will certainly help keeping harmful rays away from toddlers. Although, I think some of you will now want to see how comfortable it is to be in the third row. So now with this seat set up properly, I'm going to go and hop in the back rather ungracefully. Now, to get into the third row of seats, normally you'd have to pull a lever here, where there is indeed a lever, but because it's the CX-9, you can just press a button here, where it'll beep, and then fold, not only forward but also tip forward a little bit. Now when you push this as far forward as it goes, you actually have a lot of room here in order to step in, which is exactly what I'll do now. Yeah. Where you will find, as with most three-row SUVs, the rear seats appear to be mounted directly to the floor, which means you have almost no under-thigh support, and because of the way these seats are set up, you can't really tuck your feet in under the seats in front of you. So even with these seats pushed as far forward as possible, although I do have a good amount of knee room and a pretty decent amount of headroom, it's not suitable for adults, especially over longer distances. Maybe for 30 to 40 minute stints perhaps, but definitely no more than that. The other thing that bugs me is that even though I do have USB ports and cup holders here, which is very conveniently placed underneath my elbow, so I have no comfortable armrest, I do not have aircon vents back here. So you definitely don't want to put children back here for too long, unless the second row passengers are generous with their air conditioner vents, because I suspect you may be able to overheat back here. That said though, because the windows are rather small, there isn't really that much heat to enter the cabin from back here. There are no blinds here, so don't put toddlers back here, that's for sure. And with the Bose audio speakers just sort of right by my ear, if the driver puts up the volume too high, I think I might go deaf. But you know, the third row seats in most SUVs like this are for occasional use only. It's more about how the first and second row are, and of course about how they drive despite their size. So back in the driver's seat? Yeah, definitely back in the driver's seat. Now the thing about the CX-9 is that it's a very strange car to drive, and I have to give you a bit more context, because I think if you took that statement out of context, it might not read the way it's supposed to. So under the bonnet, you've got a 2.5 litre turbocharged engine with power now being sent only to the front wheels via a 6-speed automatic gearbox. And the CX-9 used to be available with an all-wheel drive system, but buyers in Malaysia didn't seem to like it very much. There wasn't a lot of reception for it. So for 2022, it's been revised, and now you only get front-wheel drive with this car. You do still, however, get 7 seats over 3 rows, so you can't get a 6-seater CX-9 the way you can get a 6-seater CX-8, for example, and that continues to be one of this car's selling points. So when I drove the CX-8, I was very impressed with how the 2.5 litre that I really liked in the Mazda 6 had come into the larger and heavier SUV and continued to do very well, both in terms of performance as well as fuel consumption. And I loved how, even though that was technically a large car, being a 3-row SUV, it was classified as a large car and it is based on the same platform as a CX-9, it still drove in a way that was very pleasing to the driver. It was very comfortable and very quiet, you know, as you'd expect from a large family SUV, but it also steered with the sort of precision and confidence that you expect from anything that carries the Mazda badge. With the CX-9, however, things are a little bit different. You see, the 2.5 litre engine up front is broadly the same motor, except now it has a turbocharger, so you've got more horsepower and, more importantly, more torque. And Mazda approaches turbocharging in a very different way compared to everyone else, at least that's what they claim, where even when their engines are forced induction, they aim to have a very linear torque curve as to make the engine feel like a naturally aspirated motor while still delivering torque, peak torque rather, very early on. And between that, for starters, when you're driving this car around, it feels like the torque is very late. It does feel like a naturally aspirated motor in the sense that it doesn't feel like you've got any turbo lag, but then it also doesn't feel like there's any turbo boost. So you rev it out, and it is quite happy to rev all the way to a rev line of about 6,000 RPM, which is quite high for a turbocharged motor, especially one of this size. But it just doesn't feel like there's any real oomph going on. It feels like a big, naturally aspirated engine. And when you know that it's turbocharged, especially for me, where I'm used to driving a lot of turbocharged cars, a lot of modern cars are turbocharged, and so I'm used to them by now, there's no surge of torque that would allow for smoother overtaking, for example. And that is a little bit frustrating. You end up sort of hitting the throttle a little bit harder, expecting a little bit more response that doesn't really come. On the other hand, it does mean that this engine is very responsive. So when you do want a little bit more torque, a little bit more throttle as you're powering through corners, for example, it is there. And it comes in a very natural manner, which is good. The other downside to this motor is the fact that in the 2.5 litre naturally aspirated engine, which I got in the CX-8 and I also sampled in the Mazda 6 ever so long ago, it was very pleasing to use because the car was very happy to rev, one. Two, it was very linear in its power and torque delivery. And thirdly, it was still very efficient, especially out on the open road, where there's actually cylinder deactivation to ensure that you don't end up consuming more fuel than strictly necessary. Now, I don't think this car comes with cylinder deactivation, and I suspect that in lobbing a turbocharger onto it, they've also done some other stuff to it, because suddenly this car is not very fuel efficient. So we've driven this about 540 kilometers. A full tank on this car does only 520, so I've had to put in a little bit of fuel, and the average has been 8 kilometers a litre, or 12 litres per 100 kilometers. Now, in the large SUV space like this, if you compare it to other 3-row SUVs such as the Hyundai Santa Fe, for example, this is not great, because the Santa Fe does get better fuel economy from its 2.4 litre naturally aspirated petrol motor, and you definitely get a lot better fuel economy in the 2.2 litre turbo diesel. And when you compare it to the Mazda CX-8 with the 2.5 litre naturally aspirated motor, of course, that's no compare. That 2.5 litre is so much more efficient compared to this. Of course, the CX-8 with the turbo engine, we haven't quite had a chance to sample yet, although we suspect that the fuel economy figures will be the same, which is certainly not a good thing. And it just sort of begs the question, sort of, why would you really want this? At over, or damn nearly 330,000 ringgit, the CX-9 is not exactly a cheap car. For about this kind of money, you can get a BMW 5 Series, where you'll get a 2 litre 4-cylinder, which will do 8.8 litres per 100 kilometers, or about 12 kilometers per litre, thereabouts, and it will do so all day, every day. You get a plug-in hybrid, which is a lot more efficient. For this kind of money, you could also get a Mercedes-Benz GLC, you could get a BMW X3, you could get a lot of cars with premium badges. Admittedly, they'd be smaller than this, yes, but not only would they carry premium badges, they'd also carry more fuel efficient engines that are good both in town as well as on the motorway. Whereas in this car, it seems that this engine is thirsty no matter what you do with it. I've driven this car through traffic, I've driven this car over long motorway runs, and 8 kilometers per litre is the very best that I can get, which means that this is sort of the resting fuel consumption figure for this car. And again, it begs the question, because you could get a Volvo XC60, for example, where you can get a mild hybrid system, or you get a plug-in hybrid system with even more power while still being more fuel efficient. And arguably, a vehicle like a Volvo XC60 would feel even more premium inside compared to this car. The CX-9 is a very premium feeling vehicle, sure, but it certainly does not hold a candle to actual proper premium vehicles. But I guess it really is a matter of the dynamics, perhaps. And that's sort of where I'm in two minds about this, because on one hand, mechanically this car is very good. You get a decent amount of feedback through the steering wheel, and you have a good amount of mechanical grip, even though this car is two-wheel drive. However, because it's very tall and very heavy, when you go around a corner, although the car sits quite level and there is quite a lot of grip for you to exploit, from the driver's seat it doesn't inspire confidence. And so you end up taking a very typical approach to corners, the way you would with any other SUV, which is slow in, fast out. You make full use of the 2.5 litre engine, all of its grunt, but it just doesn't inspire me the way other Mazdas do. And it makes me believe that Mazda perhaps didn't really want to make the CX-9, because you see, this car is most popular in North America and Australia, where they like cars that are very powerful but don't really care about dynamics so much because their roads are mostly straight, and so there isn't a lot of opportunity for them to feel the dynamics of a vehicle through corners, or at least it's not as big a priority to them as it is to Asian customers. And so perhaps they built this car simply to satisfy the North American demand for big luxury SUVs, while kind of losing the way in terms of making it a Mazda. Because that's what this car feels like. It feels like a very generic large SUV. It doesn't feel like a Mazda. And that Mazda sensation, to me, is a unique selling point that a lot of people pay a lot of money for. I know people with CX-5s who swear by not only their cars but also by the brand, because to them, they'd never driven a car within this segment that felt so good. And that just doesn't come across here. Now, I never had the chance to drive the CX-9 in all-wheel drive, at least not for test, and so I can't really comment as to whether or not that car felt more Mazda and more zoom than this car does. But it certainly feels like this car is battling its weight, and so it shouldn't really be considered the driver's choice in this segment, because if that's what you think this is, you are going to be very sorely disappointed indeed. That said though, the performance that is available is kind of nice to have, although that fuel consumption is kind of mad. So at the end of the day, is the CX-8 worth considering? Well, if you are looking for a large SUV with a budget of about 350,000 ringgit, then unfortunately this is kind of the only option. Everything else in the luxury segment, if you want a 7-seater, is more expensive. Cars like the Volvo XC90 and so on is a little bit pricier. Of course, if you're willing to shop down, the Hyundai Santa Fe, the Mazda CX-8 and so on, those cars do feel a little bit better than this in terms of, you know, carrying people and so on. But if you're looking at this as a premium car buyer and you want something that is fuel efficient in town while still offering decent performance on the motorway, then probably not. But the CX-9 is unique in the sense that there is no other large SUV in this segment from a mass market brand that offers this degree of comfort and refinement, and that's where this car's strongest suits are. So perhaps if you're not swayed by badge value, if you want a car that's reliable, that's good to look at, that's well specified, and you probably won't find another one in the corporate car park, then maybe the CX-9 is for you. In any case, that's been our review of the Mazda CX-9 Ignite Edition. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, jangan bodoh.